Welcome to Interview from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlsen, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on teleSUR. Millions of people are familiar with the crystal waters and high-rise hotels of Cancun. But few know that just miles from there, the native Mayan population lives in extreme poverty as corruption and tourist development encroaches on the little they have. Journalists who write about the underbelly of the Caribbean are subject to imprisonment, beatings, and worse. Today on Interview from Mexico, we'll be talking to an outspoken victim of persecution in paradise.
Las ideas, así como la libertad de expresión, jamás se encarcelan.
We're here today with Pedro Canche. Pedro, welcome to Interviews from Mexico. Pedro is a Mayan reporter in the state of Quintana Roo who was thrown in jail for 9 months for reporting on the corruption and looting that was taking place in that state. Pedro, let's start with your case. What happened last August when you were arrested and thrown in prison?
I covered an event where the Mayans got angry because they were being charged very high fees for water. So, the State Water Company, which is the Potable Water Commission, and its officials had the idea of putting meters on the water, really cheap meters, so they could make more of a profit, a higher profit. So, the meters started to charge the Mayans really expensive prices, $80, $90, $120 a month, when a Mayan makes about $40. So, it generated a protest in the Mayan area that started to spread into the communities of Spichil, Tijosuco, Xixachil. It wasn't only the country seat. No Can Felipe, no Ca Felipe Carrillo Puerto, celebrates 175 years since its founding. It is the oldest city in Quintana Roo, the oldest Mayan city. So, the Mayans were protesting, and when I read in the magazine Proceso that the leaders had been arrested for sabotage, I said to myself, this is the news of my people, and I need to cover it. So, I went there, and I started sharing information with my colleagues from Cancun, from national newspapers, including Proceso. And then there was an eviction, when the police went there and violently evicted the Mayans for protesting for something that is a fundamental right, water. Water, like air, is sacred to us. Water is necessary to bathe, to cool off, to grow plants. For the Mayans, there is no work here, so we need to use the money. We need to plant tomatoes. We have to buy seeds, and then we have to plant tomatoes, chilies. You know that we use the habanero chili accompanies all our meals. So the family vegetable garden it is a fact that it needs to be watered. So, well, if it is expensive, how am I going to cultivate my garden? It's going to be much. There's no money. There's no taquim, as we say in Mayan. So when they protest and arrest their leaders, I went out to cover the event. And then I realized they are going to accuse me of being a leader, no? When the information about the eviction was published in a national magazine, the governor got mad, and he ordered his spokesman to say that I was the one who instigated it, that I was bringing in outsiders from everywhere. And he made it seem like I was part of the events. And I responded to the governor on Twitter. I report the news, I don't make it.
And they also accused you of sabotage, which under the penal codes of the state is a very serious crime, no?
The corruption in Mexico is a sickness, and it is in the provinces where there are more human rights violations, especially towards us, indigenous people, because they think we don't think. They violate human rights more in the provinces.
It's not a situation that's very obvious or very visible to the rest of the nation or outside the nation either.
Definitely. So, when these things happen that are invisible to the rest of the country, then the corrupt people take advantage of it to attack, like in my case, for example. What happened with the water issue was a government strategy and an event that they took advantage of to say, look, we'll take this opportunity and arrest 2 leaders, and the journalists too. Why? Because in 2013, I reported on the deaths from dengue, like my aunt, like my cousin, who died of dengue. And they didn't want to scare tourists away from Cancun. In Quintana Roo, Cancun is the big tourist center, the resort. So they say, don't talk about these deaths. But I was saying, we need to put out a health warning. We need to do like they do in Cuba, for example, where they fumigate everything, even the vehicles. They fumigate the houses. They fumigate everything. But they weren't doing it. Why? Because in 2013, there were elections, and the PRI had bought votes for between 1,000 and 5,000 pesos. So they spent the money. The state of Quintana Roo is 26 billion pesos in debt, and in 2013, well, all of this money was spent on buying votes so that the PRI can continue in power there.
So they didn't have any money to confront the epidemic?
They didn't have funds, so I had to spend $20,000 so that I could help the Mayans with the dengue situation. How? How did I help them? Well, in the ultrasound, because in hemorrhagic dengue 3 and 4, the liver swells. The liver swells, and so the resonance, the ultrasound, costs 40, and the Maya can't afford that. I helped a lot of people with this. I helped with this. I helped with the information in the radio, with loudspeakers on vehicles, playing recordings with information. So I dedicated myself to this, because my aunt had already died, because my cousin had already died, so I was not going to let more Mayans die, whether or not they were related to me. I started a big campaign then, and I spent $20,000. And the thing is, the government never took responsibility for these deaths. They never, even today. There are people in Playa del Carmen who are crying for their children, because the government never helped them. Like Mrs. Fidelia Ramos, who is crying for her son Warner, She lost him at only 12 years old, because the doctors, instead of giving him the correct medication, they didn't give it to him, so gave out advice. I was telling people, I tell the government, they should prohibit aspirin. Don't take aspirin because if you do, it's that. Hemorrhagic dengue dilutes the blood and they will die. Blood comes out of people's ears, out of the eyes. It is really terrible. So, but the government, well, this happened, and I even, in the newspaper, Trabajadores de Cuba, published a story called Prohibited Death through our comrades at the Diario Trabajadores. They published that story, the prohibited death, because you can't talk about the death in Cancun.
So the government basically was suppressing your reports on dengue and then on the water protests in order to maintain a rosy image of itself.
At the time of the dengue epidemic, there were also professors protesting against the education reform of Enrique Peña Nieto, and there were 5,000 professors who blocked the highway to Cancun. There was no food coming into Cancun. There were 20 kilometers of trailers full of food that was rotting, with supplies for Cancun. So the government sent 1,200 federal police to evict them, but in the end, they came to an agreement. So, the issue here is that when there was the dengue issue, the issue of the professors, the government, in order to stifle news about these controversial issues, these issues that are so central, ordered the radio station to be burned down. Well, the situation here of who burned down the radio station is like asking who killed Kennedy.
A community radio where you were working.
A radio station that I worked with as a contributor, where I sent out the alert about dengue, where we played the song Dengue for the Governor, Dengue for the President. In that song we say, Mayan blood is strong, you can't defeat our people. You'll need to...
Well, that's a major move, to go burn down the radio station in retaliation for simply reporting on the reality of what's happening. We'll come right back to that. We have to go to a short pause. We'll be right back. Don't go away. We're back with the journalist Pedro Canche talking about persecution in the state of Quintana Roo against journalists and activists. We ended up talking about how you were arrested in the context of Mayan protests against the rate hikes for water. Tell us about how, after 9 months of imprisonment, including beatings and persecution within prison, you were able to get out.
After 9 months, they first released the leaders of the water movement charged with sabotage. And so we told the judge with the lawyers, thanks to Article 19 that was working with us, this international organization that supports journalists, it was working very hard on my case, with the media and with other international organizations. So, groups like them, like the Committee to Protect Journalists, various other groups. So we asked the judge, if you let the leaders go, why haven't you let me go? If I'm not, I am a journalist. When I testified, I gave you all the links, all of the citations, where I have published on the subject of water.
And the leaders got out because they couldn't sustain the charges or for lack of evidence, correct?
Of course, they were completely insufficient. Sabotage is an equivalent to terrorism. In fact, it's seen as internal harm to the state. And here, it was really just a grassroots protest.
So we're looking at another case, and we've had so many in Mexico, of criminalization of protest.
They criminalize the ones who protest. They criminalize those who think. They criminalize journalists. They criminalize protesters, thinkers, journalists. It is horrible. It is terrible. You can't think. The time has come in Mexico that you can't think. You can't express yourself. In Quintana Roo, it's prohibited to demonstrate. Critical journalists have suffered attacks. They get followed. They lose their jobs. Sergio Caballero was fired from his job. Arias, the website Noticaribe, has been hacked, a media outlet that was just reflecting what really happens. And with 12 del Siglo, a magazine that they cloned. And then they throw me in jail without any judicial basis. Why is there so much hostility towards me? And he tells me, Pedro, it's an order from the top. The judge tells me, Pedro, it's an order from the top. He said it like that, shamelessly. The judge, Javier Luis Ortega, said that it was an order from above. It's out of my hands, he said. And I said, they don't have any evidence in the case against you, but I can try to shorten your sentence. And I said, why? If all of the leaders are already released, and they were the people who led the thing, and I just covered it, and I have, why am I here? Why am I locked up? Definitely.
So when you say from above, you're talking about the governor's office directly.
The judicial. So, being a judge, instead of having a picture of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he has a picture of the governor. And I said to him, there's the governor Roberto Borge Angulo. And I said to him, there's the governor Roberto Borge Angulo. There's his photograph, right there. What is he doing there? He should leave, because this is a judicial office. It's not an executive office. Then they said to me, well, it's that in this state, he is the one who runs everything. He controls the judicial decisions, the legislative decisions. He can imprison anyone he wants to.
So we have no separation of powers.
It is a dream. The separation of powers in Mexico is a dream. What we have here is a dictatorship. As that one writer said, a perfect dictatorship.
Well, do you think without the support of the international organizations and Article 19, you could still be in prison?
When I wrote, 2 days before they arrested me, August 28, 2014, they arrested me on the 30th. The 28th, I was inside. I stayed in my house for 4 days. I didn't go out so they couldn't arrest me. And so I thought, I need to defend myself. I wrote a letter to the National Commission on Human Rights. They received it and they answered me the next day. The office that protects journalists, the fifth investigator, that they were already looking at my case. And so I write Article 19. I started to look online. Who can support journalists? Who can? I had never needed to think about this kind of issue, only when they burned down the radio station. There was support for the owner of the station, through a communique from Reporters Without Borders, but nothing else. So I started to look for the address of Reporters Without Borders, but I couldn't find it. But then Article 19 came up, so I said, well, Article 19, I'll go with them first. So I go, and I write to the office in London. I didn't know that they also had an office in Mexico. Most journalists don't know about it. So I think if Article 19 hadn't helped me out, I would still be in jail. They would probably have sentenced me to 20 years. I wouldn't be here talking to you. I wouldn't be watching the people from South America, from Cuba, from Bolivia, from Argentina, from Venezuela. I wouldn't have this opportunity for them to hear me on this show. I'd still be in jail. When I go to jail, they knew that I am right-handed, so they tried to hit me in the right hand.
So they attacked your instrument of work, the arm you write with.
They attacked if I were left-handed, they would have attacked my left hand. I hoped that they would get confused and cripple my left hand. Then I would be able to write. Now I can write. It's a minimum. It's still. My fingers are numb. They are semi-paralyzed. And this, well, we have to move on. This is an issue later. When I got out of jail, when Article 19 achieved that I was admitted under the mechanism, because the mechanism of protection for journalists says, because the mechanism of protection for journalists says this: Pedro Canche is in jail. We can't do anything for him because the legislation and the rules don't allow it. After he gets out, then we can. So who is going to protect me in jail? The Secretary of the Interior came and said, we can't do anything because this is a judicial issue and we can issue a precautionary measures, nothing else, because the responsible one here is the judicial branch. Well, the executive and the judicial branches, they are responsible. 4 days ago, for example, I saw the Secretary of Government, Gabriel Mendicuti, a really stupid guy, who saw me. I was sitting, and he said to me, "This is a judicial issue." He saw me there, leaving, and he said to me, "I hope that you understand that this is a judicial issue." And I said to him, "I hope that you understand that this is a political issue, because it is an issue that they still maneuvered. They threatened to put me in a maximum security prison in Nayarit. I hope you understand this is a political persecution." One of the people who worked for Gabriel Mendicuti, or Roberto Borge Angulo, the governor, and Gabriel Mendicuti, the secretary, someone named Samuel Chantun, came and said to me, "Pedro, if you keep covering the issue of the professors, we are going to take you too. They are going to take you to the maximum security prison in Nayarit." And they went away with my accountant and started to figure out who my children are, what their names are. This was about a year before they arrested me, and they started to follow me in vehicles, in white vehicles, in trucks, and they parked a car in front of my business, at my furniture workshop, and they told me, well, they were looking for information, who my customers are, and all of a sudden, I started losing customers, who are the hotel owners from the Riviera Maya. All of a sudden, they stopped coming, because the government is trying to drown me economically.
So all of this happens in the context of a series of threats that took place over a period of time against you as a journalist, to silence you as a journalist, and to silence the protests against water hikes and the teachers that you were covering within your area. This is a very serious situation. We're going to take a short pause now. We'll be right back. Don't go away. We're back talking to the journalist Pedro Canche about threats to freedom of expression here in Mexico and his own case of criminalization where he was thrown in prison in his home state of Quintana Roo. We've talked about a context of repression against journalists, principally from the governor there in the state of Quintana Roo. What can you tell us about the national context?
Quintana Roo is just a sample of what happens at the national level, which is horrific. We have never suffered so many attacks against journalists in the country. In the past few years, almost 100 have been killed, including our friend Ruben Espinosa, who, just for taking photographs, they killed him. So this repression in the country shows us that the more corruption there is, the more repression, because the corrupt are going to protect their interests. The more corruption there is, the more repression. I protect my interests as a corrupt person like this. If you want to take my money, my illegal money, if you are going to report me before and go to jail, I prefer to send you to jail. I prefer to threaten you with jail, to scare you with threats to your family. This is what we're talking about, because we're talking about jail and death. But we're not talking about the context of threats over Twitter, the death threats over Facebook, email threats, threats over telephone taps. This happens to everyone at the national level.
But so from your experience and from what you've seen now that you've joined this network of journalists who've experienced threats, you think that the principal threat is coming from corrupt politicians who are trying to hide their activities rather than organized crime, because the government tends to say that it's organized crime.
Definitely. The politicians are now the hitmen of organized crime, of drug traffickers, to kill journalists. Before, it was the opposite. The government used to hire drug traffickers to kill journalists. The politicians are the hitmen of the mafia now to kill journalists.
And from when do you mark this change?
We have noted this with the term of Enrique Peña Nieto, who brought the PRI back to power. But instead of a new PRI, what came back was, there were 12 years of the PAN, and the PRI comes back more repressive. A repressive PRI comes back, and who suffers the first attacks? Well, those of us on the front lines. The journalists, those of us who are informing the public about what is going on in the country. We are the first to fall. We are the first to be repressed. And also the natural leaders like Dr. Mireles, for example, who was defending his community and he is in jail. The PRI came back to power more repressive. So there's the example of him. Many cases in the country. We have Ostula. We have Ostula. We have Tlatlaya. We have Tlatlaya. We have Ayotzinapa with the boys. So, this repression has become very evident in the country. I ask you, in Venezuela, have 23 students died at the hands of the police? In Venezuela, can you name one journalist who has died, that they have killed? You can't. Not in Cuba either. But why does the Inter-American Press Society say that Cuba and Venezuela are the most repressive against journalists? Why? Why don't they say? Why don't they mention the issue of Mexico? Because they are, the Inter-American Press Society, are businesses. Are businesses that defend their interests in Mexico. So, if they criticize the president, the advertising arrangements that they have there, and the other business deals that they have, in addition to publicity here, whether clean or dirty, would be lost. So they are hypocrites, because they criticize other countries, but they never criticize Mexico. Never. I was in jail for 9 months, and I have never seen the Inter-American Press Society said anything about it. Only the colleagues in the Committee to Protect Journalists in New York, the CPJ, the colleagues of Reporters Without Borders, the Freedom House, various national and international organizations, but the Inter-American Press Society never even stopped to ask, what's going on here? What's going on here, no?
So it's highly politicized.
Definitely. All of this and this corrupt political system is affecting us. And who are the most repressed? Well, those of us who are in the provinces. Those of us who don't have resources to defend ourselves. If at the time when I was going to write for help on the 28th of August of 2014, if I hadn't found that link for Article 19, I put in how to protect, no, legal protection for journalists. So what appears is Article 19. If I hadn't put those words, I wouldn't have had any protection. I would have been an isolated case, and they would have called me a saboteur. Just one more item in the criminal statistics, and that's all.
Would you feel safe now?
Now that I am out of jail, the mechanism for protecting journalists didn't want to help me in jail. But now that I am out, they have offered me everything, and they have acted very generous with me. But that is only because of the pressure from Article 19. I live surrounded by cameras. I live between panic buttons, monitored by the federal police. It is hard to live like this, because I don't have the life that I used to have. I used to be able to park my car in Tulum, park my car in Comal, and hunt for lobster. I used to go fish for red snapper, get my food, but I can't do that anymore. If I leave my car there and I now go off swimming in the ocean, they will kill me there. Now there is a danger that I can feel, a threat that I can feel, and I have this fear that they can kill me anytime, especially when they killed Ruben. I was going to spend a few days there, a few days in the Navarme apartment, and then this happened. So I said, there is no safe place, not even Mexico City, not Quintana Roo. Where am I going to go? Out of the country? But I say, my land is here. My land is Maya land. My land is Quintana Roo. My land is Carrillo Puerto. Here I am, and I'm going to stay here. But the stress of living under these conditions it is very hard on the spirit. It is very tiring for anyone. After being in jail 9 months, it's to be in another jail, in the jail of impunity. I am in another prison, the prison of impunity, because they still haven't arrested, not one of the officials. So I am in the web of the prison of corruption. I don't feel like a victim, not at all. No. I don't feel like a victim, so everyone should feel sorry for me. On the contrary, I left jail with my head held high, and I say, I proved that I didn't do anything, and they attacked a journalist. They didn't attack me. They attacked freedom of expression in Mexico. They didn't attack me. They attacked freedom of expression in Mexico.
Well, unfortunately, we only have about 1 minute left in the show, and I wanted to ask you, in this dire situation, what can be done? What message would you send to younger journalists throughout the country?
In the rest of the country and in South America, English and Spanish speakers, the message is carry out responsible, ethical journalism, so that if they lock you up, you will get out well. Because if your journalism is biased, false, then you can't do that. They can make up things about you. And if some are true, that part looks bad for you. So you have to do the ethical journalism and to create networks of journalists, like I was telling you a moment ago. So I am with this journalist, and we are monitoring each other. If I publish information that is very powerful, I will share it with you, so that we all know about it, to build a network of protection, so that if there is something suspicious, if I see something strange, if there is a suspicious vehicle, for example, or if someone threatens me, I can make it public. What we have to do is make it public, like me, when they arrested me. Before they arrested me, I made it public. I put it in a video that was called Pedro Canche versus Roberto Borge Angulo. I put it in a video that was called Pedro Canche versus Roberto Borge Angulo. Why did I put up this video? Because, like I said, I need to make myself visible, like Gandhi did. If I make myself visible, it will be harder for them to arrest me. But if I hadn't recorded that video then, they might have killed killed me there in jail, and they could have said that I was killed by another prisoner, another inmate.
Yeah, it happens. Well, it's such an important message. Pedro, thanks so much for being here with us today on Interviews from Mexico.
Just voting.
And thank you. I'm Laura Carlsen. We'll be back next week on Interviews from Mexico.